One.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our Committee on Education. And actually, we are starting out with a joint hearing with the Committee on Higher Education also. It's Wednesday, February 10th, 3 o'clock, conference room 229. This meeting, including the audio and video of remote participants, is being streamed live on YouTube. You will find links to viewing options for all Senate meetings on the live and on-demand video page of the legislature's website. This Zoom meeting and YouTube live stream event will include the 3 o'clock p.m. joint agenda for the Committee on Education and the Committee on Higher Education, the 3:02 p.m. decision-making agenda for the Committee on Education, and the 3:05 p.m. agenda for the Committee on Education. In the unlikely event that we have to abruptly end this hearing due to major technical difficulties, the committees will reconvene to discuss any outstanding business at Friday, February 12th, 3 o'clock p.m., and a public notice will be posted on the legislature's website. I'd like to take this time to remind our testifiers that due to time restrictions on our hearings, we will be limiting testimony to 1 minute per testifier per bill. For the people participating remotely, all testifier audio will be muted and video disabled until shortly before it is your turn to testify. When I call your name, staff will unmute you and your time will begin. After your minute is completed, staff will mute you so that we can move this hearing along in an orderly and efficient manner. Thank you. Starting with Senate Bill 245 on our 3 o'clock agenda, joint meeting with Committee on Education and Committee on Higher Education. Relating to education, requires the Department of Education's existing free application for federal student aid, also known as FAFSA, working group to create a state plan to make completion of the FAFSA or an opt-out waiver a statewide graduation requirement by the 2023-2024 school year. Requires a report to the 2022 legislature. To testify, Terry Ushijima, Assistant Superintendent, Department of Education, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Mukado Kim, and members of the committee. I'm Terry Ushijima, Interim Assistant Superintendent with the Department of Education, testifying on behalf of Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. The department stands on our written testimony and provides comments to Senate Bill 245. While we agree that there is much merit in completing the FAFSA as it provides an important resource for families to afford college, we respectfully note that the department has concerns about making FAFSA a graduation requirement along with the possible opt-out option as stated in the reasons in our testimony. Our state has performed above the national average for the FAFSA completion rate over the past 3 years, and we are committed to continue to promote the FAFSA completion within the department and with education partners to provide additional support to students to increase the number of completions. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. The department is available for questions.
Thank you, Terry. Members, questions?
I have a question.
Senator Keith Agaran.
Yeah, I'm just curious. In the text of the proposed bill, it cites that the goal for the department is 90%, and you've been hovering at about 60%, but your testimony says that the numbers are actually quite much lower and doesn't mention any goal of FAFSA completion. Does the department have 90% goal?
Yes, it's an internal goal, and we continue to strive to get 90%, but we have not reached 90%.
Well, what about the 60% that is cited in the bill? Are you at 60 or are you at the 37 or so that is in the testimony?
That's where we are currently at this point in January. And so we still have till the rest of June to get the completion rate for this year. For 2020, our completion rate was 60.2%. That was above the average rate of 55.6%. And the highest completion rate so far amongst the states has been 78.7%.
Well, if you have an internal goal of 90%, then with the caveats that are in this bill about dealing with some of the issues that are brought up by yourselves and other testifiers, what's wrong with pursuing what's called for in this bill?
So we agree that the FAFSA is very important, and we would like to encourage as many students and parents to complete that as possible. We are concerned if it becomes a graduation requirement, as or even with an opt-out option, as the FAFSA, the parents must complete it, and there are other possible concerns that we are worried about. For example, some of the messaging that may go out may indicate that college, or allude that college might be the only option, whereas it is a very viable option that we would like students to have. And we want them to have opportunities, but it's not the only option.
So why do you have a 90% internal goal then?
We think it's important for all our students to have options, and if they choose to go to college, then this is a possible way to help with the financial aspect of that opportunity.
Okay, well, you didn't answer my question. So why are you at 90% as an internal goal if you have all these concerns about sending out the wrong message?
The message is having it as a graduation requirement. We want to continue to strive for that 90% goal. However,
Oh, but wait a minute though. If the message you're saying is that college isn't for everybody, and there are other things to make someone, a good graduate and a contributing member of our community, why are you setting the goal of 90% for FAFSA? Because FAFSA is basically for people that are aiming to go to college.
It's a very aspirational goal, and we would like students to have whatever options they choose, whatever opportunities they seek, and depending on their aspirations.
All right, whatever. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, further questions? If not, we're going to recess to deliberate on this bill. Recess. The Senate Committee on Education and Higher Education, we're reconvening committee meeting on Senate Bill number 245. After the discussion, the Senate Committee on Education Chair is recommending that we pass out Senate Bill 245 as is. Members, questions? If not, Chair votes aye.
Chair votes aye on Senate Bill 245. Vice Chair votes aye. Senator De La Cruz.
Aye.
Senator Kanuha.
Aye.
Senator Favela.
Aye.
5 members are all present, voting in the affirmative. Recommendations adopted.
Thank you.
For the Committee on Higher Ed, same recommendation to pass Senate Bill 245 unamended. Chair votes aye.
Chair Kim votes aye. Senator Kidani votes aye. Senator Keith Agaran.
Aye.
Senator Wakai. Excused. Senator Favela.
Aye.
Measures adopted, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And that ends the hearing for the Higher Education Committee.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned, and we are going next agenda for this is decision making only for Senate Bill 76, proposed SD1 relating to education. The proposed SD1 requires that the Board of Education prioritize for the Superintendent of Education position candidates that have a minimum qualification of 10 years of employment in a Department of Education, with at least 5 of those years serving in the capacity as a principal or higher, and a desired qualification for a candidate is having a working understanding of the state's tri-level system of educational administration. Let's see. Again, this is decision-making only. Members, questions? Again, Senate Bill 76, proposed SD1 relating to education. Recommendation is to pass with amendments. And we will insert the proposed draft and recommit this bill back to this Committee on Education. Members, questions? If not, thank you. She has a vote. You have this, okay. So no questions on Senate Bill 76. Chair votes aye.
Okay, so the chair votes aye on Senate Bill 76. This is a short form bill that is being amended to put in the proposed language, correct? And then recommit.
Correct.
Chair votes aye. Vice Chair votes aye. Senator De La Cruz.
Aye.
Senator Kanuha.
Aye.
Senator Favela.
Aye.
Okay, 5 members present, voting affirmative. Your recommendation is adopted.
Thank you. That adjourns that hearing. Now we are on the 305 agenda, Committee on Education, to hear Senate Bill 815 relating to education funding, establishes the maintenance of effort provisions, establishes a public education stabilization trust fund, makes appropriations. Okay. To testify, Catherine Payne, oops, am I on the right one? Yeah. Catherine Payne, Chairperson, Board of Education. Catherine, please.
Aloha, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Kim, and members of the committee. The Board of Education supports the intent of SB 815, which would establish a maintenance of effort provision for public education and establish a public school stabilization fund. We support proposed legislation that preserves funding and resources for student learning at the classroom level, including our most vulnerable students who are economically disadvantaged, English learners, or receiving special education services. We support establishing a minimum level of funding for public education, or a funding floor, which would provide much needed funding stability and predictability. The rest of my testimony is in written form and was submitted to your committee. I'll be available if you have questions.
Thank you. Members, questions? If not, moving on. Our next testifier is Superintendent Christina Kishimoto. Dr. Kishimoto, please.
Aloha, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Mikado Kim, and members of the committee. This legislation is SB 815. I stand in strong support of it. This legislation is of utmost importance in solidifying Hawaii's commitment to equity and empowerment for all public school students. Our school leaders rely on adequate and predictable funding to provide innovative learning opportunities. Stable funding will provide our schools the security they need to implement programs as students' needs and aspirations evolve without the worry of budget cuts and the need to decrease offerings. A Hawaii maintenance of effort commitment will ensure educational funding remains constant from year to year, providing for comprehensive student supports and preventing drastic educational inequities among students. The enactment of this legislation will ensure a high-quality public education system that is supported and funded by our state with adequacy, equity, predictability, and stability.
Thank you, Dr. Kishimoto. Members, questions? Hearing no questions, we're moving on to our next testifier, Corey Rosenly, President, Hawaii State Teachers Association. Corey, please.
Thank you, Chair Kidani. HSTA supports SB 815, but we do suggest amendments. The first part we do like. We have seen the proportion of the amount of the DOE's budget decrease from 23.1% in fiscal year 2014 to 19.7% in fiscal year 23. That represents, if we had kept at the same proportion, $234 million less in the proportional funding. The one part that we are asking for an amendment for is that what we've seen is from year to year, the education budget does go up except for in economic downturns. And this bill currently allows for the governor to waive that. If we truly want to keep the education budget steady, then there should not be an ability to waive it even during economic downturns. And we're asking that the Senate committee delete section 302A, which would ask for temporary suspension of the MOE. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions? If none, moving on to our next testifier, Tom Yamachika, Tax Foundation of Hawaii. Tom, please.
Thank you, Chair and members. Tom Yamachika from the Tax Foundation. We understand and appreciate the intent behind this measure, but I think the practical reality is that no legislature can bind another one. So whatever you say and whatever you enact can be undone by any subsequent legislature the same way. So there are technical concerns with the current measure as drafted. I've gone over some of those in my testimony, so I think those should be addressed. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Tom. Members, questions? If not, the next testifier, Sherry Nakamura for He'e Coalition. Sherry, please.
Aloha, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Kim, and members of the committee. My name is Sherry Nakamura, Director of He'e Coalition. We would like to comment on HB 611. He'e fully supports the concept of a long-term stable funding for public education. We have comments on the Public Education Stabilization Fund proposal. We suggest that rather than calculating a year-on-year difference of the entire state education allocation, the comparison be narrowed to EDN 100, school-based budgeting, and EDN 150, special education funding. The reason is we want to stabilize funds where it impacts students the most, which is in the classroom. In addition, we are not comfortable with a special fund in which the DOE would have full discretion without transparency and accountability, the two tenets for which the coalition consistently advocates. And I apologize, I said the incorrect bill number. It's SB 518.
815.
815, thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Members, questions? There are no other testifiers with oral testimony at this time. We have written testimony from Department of Budget and Finance. Is someone here? Is Craig Uri? Someone here from Budget and Finance? I have some questions.
Senator Neil Miyahira for the Department of Budget and Finance.
And Robert Yu from the Department of Budget and Finance.
Thank you, Neil and Robert. So my questions for Budget and Finance is that if this bill were to pass, how would Budget and Finance implement the transfer of the funds?
Well, we believe this essentially is an appropriation, so we require an appropriation from the legislature. We don't think we have or the governor has general authority to do that. Because according to the Constitution, we can only spend money pursuant to appropriations.
Thank you. And then, so what does the transfer of funds to the trust fund mean for overall state finances?
Well, Senator, as a matter of general policy, we do not support dedication of general fund revenue sources to specific uses. That's our position. We think the present procedures for budgeting, where the administration and the legislature can assess statewide requirements and use all of the general fund resources as necessary to meet that, given the circumstances that we're facing, that would be the most appropriate thing. So, we're not supportive of that aspect of this bill.
Well, I guess I sort of disagree, because we have other departments that get general funds, through their programs, et cetera, so which is set aside. So we can disagree on that. Were you consulted by the Department of Education as to this bill and the funding mechanism of this bill?
I don't believe so.
I'm sorry, I could not hear.
I don't believe so.
Okay, so should this bill pass, or do you perceive that other department programs may not get the sufficient funding, or there may be delays in payroll or other obligations?
Our concern is whenever you carve out whenever you take out general funds from the pot, there's less money to go around for everybody else. So, we could have problems in other areas, because if you take out a source of funding to use exclusively for the Department of Education, then there's that much less money for the rest of the programs.
Thank you for that. Members, do any of you have questions for the Budget and Finance?
I have a question.
Senator Kim.
So right now, the only dedicated funding we have is HTA, is that correct? And that money comes out of the transit, the visitor tax? TAT?
Yeah, but as you recall, Senator, that allocation to Convention Center and TAT preceded the money coming to the general fund, I think,
Right.
if I recall.
So that's the only, is there any other dedicated funding?
Not that, there may be, but I don't think so offhand.
Okay. So according to this bill, you said that the only way you can expend is by an appropriation. So the legislature has to every year appropriate money into the fund?
Well, yeah, I for sure, out of the fund, I think you would have to do. We would have to consult the AG's office about moving money into the fund.
Okay, so how would that money be moved into the fund?
We'll have to
I'm sorry?
Let's talk with the AG's office about if this language works.
Okay, because I guess I'm not clear either. So if every year if that amount changes, it would change by statute? How would it change?
It would, as as we read the bill, the amount would vary between the budget and whatever, so the difference is between the budget, so it's not like a constant amount.
So the amount would change, so, but then is that, the legislature would have to determine that amount?
No amount is determined in the bill. It's the difference between the current year appropriation and the previous year's appropriation. Just reading the bill. And the difference of that is put into the trust fund. It seems like it.
So the difference between the last year's appropriation and the current year appropriation, is that what you're saying?
I think that's what the bill is saying, that the state appropriation to the department for the current fiscal year are less than the preceding fiscal year. The difference between the preceding fiscal year appropriation and the current fiscal year appropriation shall be deposited to the trust fund. That's the wording in the bill.
So only the difference is put into the trust fund?
Yeah.
That's what it appears to read.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not clear either. Because if it's only the difference in the trust fund, then that's not enough money to, I'm not, okay. Okay, thank you. I'm not clear.
Members, any further questions of Budget and Finance? If not, if Board of Education Chair Payne is still available, I have a question for her. Thank you, Chair
Yep.
Payne.
Yes, I'm here.
If this bill should pass, how does the board plan on holding the Department of Education accountable for the uses of the trust fund?
Well, that, Senator, is one of the reasons that I said that we support the intent. There are some questions that came up in our legislative committee concerning that, just the lack of clarity because we couldn't find other examples. And we felt that we would hear more clarity as the bill moved forward. But certainly any expenditures of the Department of Education need to go through the board as part of the budget. So that would be an expectation.
I appreciate that, Chair Payne, but I do know that in listening to some of the past board meetings, in your Finance and Infrastructure Committee, for instance, recently, where the chair, and I forget the other committee, where that chair also had deferred hearing, moving on certain things to the general business meeting because the superintendent did not have answers for the board, but the chairs of those committees were overruled anyway, and you chose to hear those, the issues in the general business meeting, which to me took the authority away from the chair. So I have some reservations on that and would like to know exactly, as we move this bill along, how the board is going to hold DOE accountable for use of trust funds. So I just wanted to put you on notice on that I would like that something more definitive. Right now, the bill does not require any reporting on the expenditures of funds, any reporting to the Board of Education. So this is why, we're going to not know how DOE is spending the money, and this is not okay with me, and I'm sure it's not okay with the legislature if we don't have a clear understanding of that. So do you believe that the bill should be amended to require reporting to the board on expenditures or require board approval?
I think, Senator, that is what we would expect. So if you put that in the bill, that would not have any objection from the board. And as I said earlier, there is a lack of clear understanding on the board about exactly what this trust fund would entail. But whatever it is, we think that transparency in spending is very important, and we do want to have that information come to the board.
Thank you, Chair. Members, do any of you have questions of Chair Payne, Board of Education? If not, thank you. Is Superintendent still online? I have some questions for the Superintendent also. Thank you, Chair Payne.
Aloha, Chair, I'm on.
Thank you. Superintendent, what could the DOE spend the trust fund allocations on?
The trust fund, it sounds like from the way the language is written in the bill, is directed back to the core education mission of the DOE, and so it's for our core work. The language in the bill seems to reflect that the intention is that the trust fund is not needed if the DOE receives flat or increased base funding, and the trust fund is a safeguard if that base funding is not held flat or harmless year over year. And so I don't think the trust fund would, as the bill was written, would ever need to be funded if in fact the intention of the bill is carried out, which is to ensure that there is a base funding that is fully funded year over year at some minimum level.
Thank you. As the bill is currently written, would the DOE be restricted in any way on what the trust fund proceeds could be used for?
Well, I think the language in the bill could always be amended to be clearer about it, but based on current board policy, any funds that the administration is budgeting for our schools, for our organization, overall for the tri-level goes through the Board of Ed for the purpose of delivering on the mission of teaching and learning. And so the trust fund would be limited to our core mission and the policies already in place by the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed can also add to its policies if the trust fund was created. That's another safeguard or way of clarifying, or the bill itself can have added language about the restrictions of that trust fund. But as it reads right now, it would still have to adhere to the policies that are in place on how expenditures occurred in the DOE. Those are reported on a regular basis, and it goes through the board for approval before I can spend those.
Okay, so if the legislature decided to cut positions or programs, and this is how I'm reading this bill, the salaries and program funding could be replaced by the trust fund?
So yes. Yes, so the trust fund is basically a proxy for general funds.
So then the DOE could reestablish positions and programs even though the legislature cut them?
Yep.
The intent is to, as the language reads, is to provide predictability and stability for planning of educational programs year over year, with an understanding that there's a commitment to a base budget.
Okay, but you didn't answer my question, Superintendent. So this is how I'm reading it, that even if the legislature were to cut positions and programs, you could still reinstate them by using the trust fund to fund this?
We would still have a budget that goes through the Board of Education and falls under those policies.
So you're saying then the board would have to approve the use of the funds?
The board should be approving the use of all of our funds, yes.
True, but I will
There
tell
is
you
an
the same
annual
thing I
budget
told, the
that's
same thing I
approved.
said to the Chair Payne, In some of the last meetings that I've listened to of the board, when asked how you were going to spend ESSER funds, there was no real clear answers. So this is why I have some reservations about this bill. And I just want you to know that. I think that right now I'm not seeing the authority of the board expressed in their meetings when it comes to deciding on how funds are being used at the DOE. Members, I don't have any more questions of the department, but Senator Kim has questions.
Thank you. Superintendent, so what would happen in subsequent years should the decline of population happen and there's a decline in enrollment in all public schools? And I know we've talked about closing down schools in the past because of lack of enrollment. So in that sense, shouldn't our budget then reflect, when you say stabilization, that reflects that? And so there would be a reduction?
So thank you, Senator. There is language in the bill that speaks to the 3-year average and looking at that there would be an adjustment to that base fund based on that enrollment decline, looking at the enrollment drop over 3 years. The idea is to have it over several years' time because we have up and downs, 1 year to the other. So the idea is to have a point in time that makes sense. If you see a 10% decline in enrollment over a 3-year period, then there should be an adjustment down. Just like if there's an uptick in that enrollment over that 3-year period, we should be adjusting upward as well.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any more questions for the Department of Education? Thank you. If not, that's all we have for Senate Bill 815, and we will now move on to our Senate Bill 816 relating to a state lottery. Creates a state lottery to begin by January 1st, 2022. Creates a state lottery commission, state lottery account, and lottery administration account. Requires certain amounts of lottery revenues to be deposited into the administrative account, general fund, and special funds for university facilities and operations and public school operations. To testify, Catherine Payne, Chair of the Board of Education. Catherine, please. Oops, sorry. I'm on the wrong list. Sorry. Sorry, Catherine. I'm sorry. To testify, Brian Hallett, Assistant Superintendent, Department of Education.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Mikado Kim. The department stands on its written testimony with comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions? Next to testify, Catherine Awakuni Kolan, Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs.
Thank you.
Catherine.
Good afternoon, Chair Kidani, Vice Chair Mercado Kim, members of the committee. Kat Awakuni Kolan on behalf of the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. The department stands on its written testimony respectfully opposing. There are a couple of reasons why we believe it's still a bit premature, given that the State Lottery Task Force has not completed an examination of the creation of and the sustainability of a state lottery, and then sort of noting the inconsistency with our overall departmental mission. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Members, questions of Director Colon? If not, moving on to Tricia Nakamatsu, Deputy Prosecuting Attorney. Tricia, please.
Hi, Senator. They are not present.
I'm sorry, didn't hear your name.
Not present.
They're not present.
Not present.
Oh, they're not.
Senator, they're not present.
Okay, thank you. Philip Johnson, Honolulu Police Department.
Good afternoon, Chair. And the Honolulu Police Department, we stand also on our written testimony in opposition. Be happy to answer any questions you may have for me.
Thank you, Philip. Tom Yamachika, Tax Foundation of Hawaii.
Thank you, Chair. Tom Yamachika for Tax Foundation. We've submitted written testimony with the studies cited in that. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tom. Members, questions? Okay, we don't have any further oral testimony, but we do have several written testimonies. Members, questions of any of our testifiers?
Yeah, I have a question for each meeting.
Senator Favela, please.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so what would be you guys' concern on this bill? Green?
Several concerns. As cited in a lot of the studies and the testimony I've read and other research, lotteries throughout the country tend to be the highest users are the poorest people, minorities, and those with the least amount of money, which lead to a lot of social problems connected with lottery and gambling. So that's pretty much our basic.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Members, further questions? If not, that concludes our testimony on this measure, and we are going into recess for discussion. We are reconvening the Committee on Education to deliberate on Senate Bill 815 and 816. For Senate Bill 815, recommendation of the chair is to pass with...
I don't have voting sheets.
Pass with amendments, clarifying that the amount deposited into the Stabilization Trust Fund shall only apply to reductions to direct school funding sources such as EDN 100, 150, and 600 as requested by HRE. Also clarifying that the Department of Education shall make an appropriate allocation from the Stabilization Trust Fund to EDN 600 to ensure that any reductions in EDN 600 are appropriately compensated in the same way as EDN 100. Clarifying on page 4 that the difference in state appropriations between fiscal years that shall be deposited into the Stabilization Trust Fund shall only occur in deficit years and not surplus years. Requiring Budget and Finance to produce a report on general excise tax revenues diverted from the general fund to the Stabilization Trust Fund and the impact that diversion had on other state departments and operations. Also for the BOE to approve and the Department of Education to report on any dollars spent from the Stabilization Trust Fund. And then further to defect the date to July 1, 2050. Members, questions on the amendments? If not, recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Chair votes aye on Senate Bill 815 with amendments. Vice Chair votes with reservation. Senator De La Cruz.
Aye.
Senator Kanuha.
Aye.
Senator Favela.
Aye.
Okay, 4 ayes, 1 with reservation. Recommendations adopted.
Thank you. For Senate Bill 816 relating to a state lottery, recommendation of the chair is to pass with amendments, pushing back the start date of the lottery to January 1, 2023 to allow the commission and task force more time to set up the lottery structure. Members, questions? If not, recommendation is to pass with amendments. Chair votes aye.
Chair votes aye on Senate Bill 816 with amendments. Vice Chair votes no. Senator De La Cruz.
Aye.
Senator Kanuha.
Aye.
Senator Favela.
Aye.
Okay, 4 ayes, 1 no. Recommendations adopted.
Thank you, members. This concludes our meeting. Meeting's adjourned.